Hello to the people that are joining, and we'll get started in a moment. We'll just give people a chance to arrive. So hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Sarah Ray and I'm the Research Editor at Global Government Forum, which is an events and media company focused on sharing best practice across the public sector globally. And at today's event, we're going to be discussing how local governments can reap the benefits from artificial intelligence, as well as manage some of the risks. So there's a lot of enthusiasm and hype about AI and how it could improve cities. And so today we're going to hear directly from city and local government leaders about how they're thinking about and approaching AI. We've got 4 great speakers today from the UK, Copenhagen, Denmark and Canada. We've got Eddie Copeland, who is the Director of the London Office of Technology and Innovation, Marie Havid Damborg, who is the Head of Digitalisation in the Technical and Environmental Administration in the City of Copenhagen, Mark Peterson, who's the Head of Data and Insight for North Yorkshire Council, and Sonia Bra, who is the Chief Technology Officer for the City of Toronto. So we'll get going with the discussion very soon, but to the people in the audience, I just wanted to say, please do send your questions in as you think of them, as we want the session to be as interactive as possible, and we'll take questions throughout the event. So to get started, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to give us a little bit of a status update on where they're at and how they're using AI today. So I'm going to start with Eddie. If you could tell us a little bit about Lottie and what's going on in London, please.
Thank you very much indeed. So hi everyone. Yes, I'm Eddie Copeland from the London Office of Technology and Innovation. We are London's collaborative innovation team. I say collaborative because London's a slightly unusual city. It's made up of 32 boroughs plus the tiny city of London. They're all very independent. And so we're there to try and facilitate the collaboration on digital tech, data and innovation type projects. Now, the disadvantage of having such a fragmented city is that it's hard to do stuff at scale. The advantage for topics like AI is that we have 33 different test beds, and it's been really pleasing to see London boroughs doing exactly what we'd want them to see them doing, trying things, starting small and exploring together what kind of use cases work, and sharing that knowledge via Lottie so we can scale those solutions much faster. And I'll give you an example each of 3 key different types of AI. So there's the narrow AI, the thing where we're learning from historic data to do one thing very, very well. Generative AI, which obviously everyone has been talking about at great length over the last couple of years, generating new content based on prompts. And then more recently, agentic AI. So that AI that is able to proactively and very autonomously do entire series of combined tasks together. So on the narrow AI front, one of the most interesting use cases I've seen is where AI is being applied to digital twin technology. So the idea here of a visual digital twin, it's kind of like Google Street View, but much higher fidelity. So you're doing an entire scan of a whole region, a local authority area. And the idea is that you can train an AI to spot anything you want it to spot in that visual imagery data, and it negates the need for some frontline workers to have to go out and inspect things. One cool use case that might just pay for the whole technology and make all the other use cases free is in a London setting. If you have advertising hoardings like billboards on bus stops or just advertising on the side of buildings, that advertising has to pay the local council business rates. We've been using the AI to spot all the advertising hoardings in a borough, compare it against the business rates database. If you can spot some that's not paying the business rates, you can bring in that extra income, and that alone, as I said, pays for the technology. Harrow Council in the UK has been trying that to great effect. On the generative AI front, lots and lots of local authorities, both in London and beyond, have been using generative AI tools in areas like social care. So imagine the scenario: a social worker sitting down with an individual, and rather than staring at their laptop typing away notes, they're able to have a much more human conversation, knowing that AI is live transcribing every single word that is said and writing up the first cut of the case notes. In future, we can make that much more advanced by actually learning from those historic case notes. So, I'm about to meet a person called Peter. how else have people like Peter benefited in the past? We'll see if we can get to that. And then on the agentic AI stuff, so this AI that can do whole series of tasks, it's been interesting to note Islington Council have been embedding AI into WhatsApp for social housing tenants. So they can say, I've got a problem with my shower window that won't close properly. It can identify and have a conversation in 92% of local languages spoken in the Islington area. And diagnose the issue and then book an appointment. So does that whole series, whether it's 12 in the afternoon or 3 o'clock in the morning, completely automated. So from a Lottie perspective, we're there to help all those boroughs learn from each other, find answers to questions that they can't answer between themselves. And then we need to take a really hard look at what will it take to try and realize some of these opportunities around AI that are sort of so loftily spoken about at all the conferences that we go to. And from our side, we are keen to emphasize you cannot have the shiny AI possibilities that's getting everyone so excited without investing in some core fundamentals. We have to think about the technology that this sits upon. And a big issue, certainly in a UK setting, is some of our biggest incumbent suppliers of big dominant IT systems used by public services. They won't even offer access via what you call an API, so the software can talk to each other to make those things possible. We're going to have to do something about that. We've got to talk about data. If we've got rubbish data feeding into these AI models, we cannot expect to rely upon the outputs that they create. We've got to think about people. We've got to think about, are our staff trained to use these in a responsible, ethical, augmentative, if that's a word, capacity, not deferring blindly to what an AI says, but actually using it to augment their skills. And we've got to think about how our residents, our users react to interacting with an AI. This will be all very counterproductive if they find it alienating. And last but least, my final point is we cannot just take shiny new technology, bolt it onto the same old ways of working we've had in the public sector for 20 years and expect profound change. Let this be an opportunity to fundamentally rethink some of our service models, not just add AI and hope for the best. Look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks. Some really interesting examples, and we'll definitely come back to some of those fundamentals that you mentioned and get a bit more detail on those. So thank you. And Marie, could you tell us a bit about Copenhagen, please?
Yes, and hello everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I'm looking forward to this very timely and interesting discussion. So I want to share a bit about what are we doing in the city of Copenhagen, but I would like to start on a national level. I think you all know that that Denmark have a very high digitalized public administration, but even though AI has really brought digitalization into the political spotlight, since 2022 we have had for the first time our first national digitalization minister, and recently our government had set a goal for AI to free up to 30,000 full-time positions in the public sector by 2035. And one of the core issues in Denmark in the moment is legal authority. So we have a national AI task force working on how to remove barriers in regarding to getting a clear legal basis for using responsible AI. But let me get back to Copenhagen. In Copenhagen, we have developed some guiding principles on how to use AI. It's about value, it's about ethics, it's about legality. We want to build both an AI-ready organization and also an AI-ready infrastructure, better data, stronger platforms, and also increasing digital confidence among our staff and leaders. And one example is that we have our own KKGPT platform, a generative AI tool developed in-house for safe use. So it allows all our 46,000 employees to experiment with AI in their daily task in regarding to summarizing, drafting, and researches. I would also like to share a couple of examples how we're working with AI in the technical and environmental administration where I'm from. Also in regarding to some of our problems. One of our biggest operational challenges is actually, for example, the building permit process. It's complex, it's time consuming, it's highly regulated, and both citizens and businesses expect faster and more predictable outcome from us as a municipality. We've worked with traditional AI and digitalization like robot automatic processes, and now we want to use that experience to move to more advanced AI. We have launched an innovation partnership with private companies where we want to test to use AI to make decision support. We want to start in simple areas in regarding to the building permit process and then hoping to scale into a lot of other areas. Another pressing problem in Copenhagen is, of course, the climate change. I think you all know that Copenhagen has ambitious goals in regarding to climate. We don't only want to be carbon neutral, we also want to reduce citizen consumption emission by 50% by 2035. That is quite ambitious. I think we expect that data and AI is going to be important in regarding to achieving that goal. But so far, we have mostly used AI in regard to reducing our own operation. For example, using AI in optimizing energy in public building to balance energy production and energy consumption. We've also used AI in regarding to analyzing our fleet, reducing our fleet, moving to more sustainable transport from cars to bikes, for example. We also use AI to simulate traffic with great AI traffic models, also in regarding to urban planning and more sustainable transport. We also, in regarding to climate, are exploring how can we use data and AI to nudge our citizens to a more sustainable behavior. We're having some small experiments on, for example, waste sorting. But also, climate change is a major challenge, but I also think in regarding to AI, this will give us both some opportunities, but also some dilemmas. What data can and will we use? Where will we draw the ethical line? Therefore, it is also really crucial that our political leadership is close and is on board on what we want to do on AI. So just to wrap up, where are we in Copenhagen? What is our focus? We want to get the organization ready. Skills, mindset, leadership is essential. Collaboration is the key, cross-section. And AI has to follow the public values and our goals. It's not a goal in itself. It's a tool to make the city that we want to have in Copenhagen.
Excellent, thank you so much. And again, we'll definitely return to some of the points that you raised. Mark, could you give us an update from North Yorkshire?
Yeah, so hopefully you can see that screen now.
Yes.
Yep,
okay.
Brilliant. So thanks for having me. Afternoon, everybody. Mark Whitson from North Yorkshire Council, and one of our fundamental principles that we have from an organisational perspective is how we support the most vulnerable in society. So I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about AI and how we're using that to support citizens. Now, from our perspective, it's more than just the technology. As Eddie's already touched on, it's about practice, it's about ethics, and it's about how we do that. So from a North Yorkshire perspective, we kind of took a three-prong approach, and that's around assurance, reassurance, and using it. And one of the major pieces that sits in that assurance box is that ethical impact assessment. And now that naturally has kind of your accountability, transparency, your governance elements, all of those things that are the natural kind of data technology type space. But that human agency and dignity element becomes absolutely critical for us. It's that question about just because you can, should we? And that's got to be right at the forefront of any of those decisions that we're making. So talking about the vulnerables, we've done a few prototypes, one of them being around knowledge mining. And a kind of a quick backdrop of this, for those of you in the UK, you might be aware, is that in 2011, there was something called the Monroe Report. And then in 2022, there's a Josh McAllister report. This is looking at how much time is spent by social workers doing admin versus doing actual social work. And the genuinely terrifying figure is that around 80% of their time is spent doing admin versus social work. So where they should be sat on a sofa having a really, really valuable, really rich conversation with people, they're not. They're sat at a computer tapping away. And that's clearly not a space. When we think about our access to information through streaming platforms and how we can just get all of that information at our fingertips, but yet protecting our most vulnerable in society, that's totally different. So the product that we created, the little diagram at the top there, we've got what we call a Ferris wheel, and that just kind of shows the traditional number of connections that we expect within the system. And that'll be a mum, a dad, it'll be maybe siblings, grandparents, and probably a few social workers. We know that keeping children in their space, where they live, in their schools, in their sports clubs, gives them much better life outcomes. But that's not a very big number of people, particularly when you might have problems at home, to try and keep that individual safe. So what the tech does is it scans through all of the words that were ever written about that child, and instead of ending up with quite a small diagram like that, we end up with a diagram like this. Now, this gives loads of threads for a social worker to pull at, to go and investigate and see whether there's other people that can keep that child safe. So this creates huge opportunity. And the approach we took, we built it against some standards. So actually, this is for children's, but you could do it against adults. You could do it against other areas where you've just got text and documents. Another thing that we created is Policy Buddy, or as we affectionately know it, Polly. And what that is an LLM, really simple, but it's put across the top of our local policies and across the national children's guidelines. And what that means is that you can now go and ask a question. So here, I'm a new social worker. I'm about to go on a first statutory visit. And it'll just give you a summary. So it gives you the bullets of what you should do before the meeting, during the meeting, and after, and whether there's any key considerations. That helps social workers because actually sometimes we might feel bad about going and asking the same person the same question multiple times. The technology doesn't care. You can ask it 1,000 times if you want, so there's no judgment in it. The really interesting bit gets that actually you can start to tailor the output towards the person that you're supporting. So in this instance, it's an 8-year-old boy who's in the looked after review process, but he's really into superheroes. So now let's get it to write the guidelines in the theme of superheroes with the language that an 8-year-old would understand. That gets really, really exciting. But maybe it turns out that the person's first language isn't English. So then you just ask it to translate it in Polish, and then that becomes even cooler. So this is really exciting that you've now got something super tailored to that individual child that supports them through the process. So that's one thing. And the last one I'm going to touch on is speech to text. Now, Eddie touched on this around that technology. Magic Note is one example. There's a few others that we're testing. And we're not testing products, we're testing capabilities. This is about how you can embed something within the organization, not about how we deliver a particular product. And as was highlighted, it takes the text, it takes that conversation, translates it into a shape and gives you that kind of first draft. The really important bits are that it's not just about faster admin. So the point that Eddie made around the person could be much more present within that conversation, that's absolutely critical, but they've got the confidence that the conversation's recorded. And that improvement in staff morale, we've had that people have told us that this type of technology improves mental health. That's huge for the service and those types of skills that we know that it's difficult to recruit people into. And the last bit I would touch on is a really affectionate diagram. It's the character we've called Dorothy, or Dottie as she's known. And this is the data problem that's been touched on a couple of times. And this is the fact that Dottie, that rough outline, describes what one service, one organization holds, but we know that the information is held across lots of different services, lots of organizations, lots of systems. And if you pull that out, maybe Dottie looks a little bit more like this. Hopefully we get the full color version, and actually that allows us to make a much better, much more holistic decision. So it's a little whistly stop too, but hopefully for those that like pictures, that helps. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks. Yeah, it was good to have the visual guide as well, so thank you very much. And Sonia.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm Sonia Brar from the City of Toronto, and it was really great to actually hear from the other panelists as well, because there's a lot of key themes in terms of the safe and responsible use of AI, but also just the magic that can happen if we do push ahead and try to integrate it into daily lives. So at the City of Toronto, so just a little bit about the city, we are almost about 2 million residents, highly diverse. So over 50% of our residents speak a different language as their first language. It's a city that's gone through a lot of growth over the last 10 to 15 years and continues to experience that growth. So when we thought about, where we should focus in terms of new technology, but specifically AI, how do we really throw it at some of our larger challenges? And as a city, we're really focused on, so if you think about growth and you think about the diversity, 4 areas. So we do have a lot of focus on housing and more specifically affordable housing. So building more housing, we do have targets by 2030 of building over 60,000 new affordable homes. We think about just how much construction is going around the city. So transportation and just moving people across the city is a huge challenge for us. And then we think about just, I think someone else mentioned just, recreation and how do you get the right people to the right recreational activities. The city happens to be one of the largest, if not the largest, low-cost providers of activities where, children as well as families and seniors really take advantage of. So how do you get better access to those in their very specific neighborhoods? And then the fourth area is around just the customer experience between our residents and the city itself. So we provide over 600 different kinds of services. So you can imagine with that kind of scale and complexity, it becomes a challenge to be able to provide that personalized service. So where we started just a few months ago is, so the city hadn't really taken a stance on the use of AI. There was some experimentation done a few years ago, but really it was quickly shut down because there were concerns around cyber, around privacy, around bias. So we have taken an approach and a stance actually very recently around the use of AI across the city to be able to tackle these 4 areas, but also allow our staff actually to experiment with the tools that are already out there. So we have launched our new Gen AI guidelines as of a few weeks ago that really emphasizes kind of that human-centric approach, the areas that we're really focused on, that we really want to push ahead with, but balanced with some of the risks that were called out already this morning. So it's, the guidelines really are there to really help acknowledge that we want to use it, but we understand that there's questions, there's fears, there's a way to manage it, and to be able to provide some of that guidance around on how to do that. And the great discovery in doing these guidelines was that we already have a lot of great policies in place that protect, around data privacy, around cyber, around the ethical use of systems, acceptable use around our systems. So what we decided to do is just wrap this around some of the policies that we already have as an accelerator. Because a lot of times, we'll dig in and say we need to create a new policy. It may take years, but we really wanted to accelerate and build on the foundation that we already have at the city around, our sound infrastructure and sound policies to really make sure we've got good responsible use of tech. So really decided to emphasize that. And provide some kind of use cases and scenarios around, education around like how do you really interact with a Gen AI tool, the do's and don'ts, some of the safe practices. Because at the end of the day, I like to think about Gen AI as, it's almost like an advanced search in many ways. But when you're interacting with it, you don't feel like you really do feel like you've got an assistant and you're having this dialogue. It almost feels personal. So we really just needed to acknowledge that piece of it and make sure that it was well understood that it is a piece of technology. There are limitations. I like the Dottie chart because it also applies to Gen AI as well. Like the information may not be and actually is not likely to be accurate. And the fact is, as humans, we are to use it as an assistant, but also we're very responsible for how we apply it and making sure it's valid, it's accurate, it's limited in bias, and it really fulfills the mission that we're here to accomplish at the end of the day. So that's what the guidelines are for. It's created a lot of excitement across the city because now, people feel like they have permission. We know everybody uses AI. Everybody uses AI in their daily lives. We know people were using it anyways, but we want to give people permission to really experiment and push the bar here because we are looking for innovation. And like I mentioned, those 4 areas, really trying to figure out how we can help unlock some of the value there. When we're thinking about just use cases, a lot of great use cases out there, and I'm very happy to see the advancement that all of you have made. The areas that we're looking at very specifically, so to help with congestion management around transportation, our biggest challenge is around construction, like just the amount of construction that's going on around the city. So we are looking to do modeling using some of our enterprise data platform and figure out how we can best combine construction projects and move people around the city more effectively. So it's almost like a mini digital twin. The second area that we're looking at is around, I think Murray or somebody mentioned permitting around buildings. So we're looking at development reviews. So we are also very highly regulated in terms of, where you can develop and some of the conditions. And it's very frustrating for the person who's submitting their project in for a development review. So just in a user interface that will help kind of guide through the process and do some of those checks and balances up front before anything is submitted. The third area is around just our customer experience. Again, I mentioned the language, the multiple languages that we have across the city and the diversity across the city and just the complexity. So just a better interface in the language of choice to help navigate the city and get their request into the right place. And then the last piece is around our Parks and Recreation group. Late last year, we launched a new recreational tool that really made a difference in terms of access to activities, but using some of that to really understand the kinds of activities and kind of programming that we need to deliver in the various neighborhoods. And then watching out for cleanliness across the city, because we are a city with many, many parks. And our summers are very short, so we want to make best use of them. So making sure that, when we're looking at waste management, when we're looking at maintenance, is that we are using the appropriate sensors and tools, and then eventually AI around predictive maintenance across the city, so we can make the best use of our summers. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Sarah.
Excellent, thank you. And so we'll pick up on some of the points in a moment, but we have had a question from the audience, which is for Marie, but I will put it to people more broadly. So you mentioned around using AI for climate action, environmental benefits. So how are you balancing that with the concerns about the environmental impact of AI? And I guess it's something that organisations will have to increasingly think about.
Well, I think that's actually quite a difficult challenge, because I don't think that we as a municipality have the choice not to use AI, but still here there's something about how do we educate the people to use AI in the right way. So that is kind of our guideline. We have to be better AI users. We have to think where to use AI and where not. And then we also have to, of course, use the capability as big organizations to put a pressure on tech companies to really make the politicians understand what priorities they have to make. So this will only get AI more in the political center, I think, of which way to go.
Excellent. Any of the other panelists want to share anything about how they're thinking through that issue? Mark?
I'm happy to come in. Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting that point that Marie made there around behavior of people that use it. I saw a very flawlessly done video of cats doing Olympic diving the other day. Now, would I say that that was the most ethical use of AI to generate that video? Probably not. So this is about understanding what use cases we attach the AI to and making sure that we use that. I mean, it's interesting. People quite often focus around energy usage, particularly in an AI space, but actually water usage is a significant one too. And actually, there are lots of challenges across the piece. I think, as been highlighted, we can't not use it. It's about trying to look at the totality of the benefit across. Does the benefit of using it outweigh the negatives that are created by it? But it's not an easy scale to balance.
Sonia, was it something that came up when you were creating guidelines?
I think so. When we were creating guidelines, there's always well, hold on a second, right? Like, where is this going to go? And yes, there is a lot of fear. There's a big ocean that we haven't yet experimented with. But I agree with the approach on it does come down to the very specific use cases. So to complement our guidelines, we have put in kind of an assessment framework that we'll use. So we do want to cultivate ideas. We want to get people to get creative. We have an AI challenge that we're announcing very shortly for our internal staff to come up with ideas, because we are looking for ideas on how we can better perform as a city and provide better service. But there will be boundaries and guidelines around it, and it really is going to come down to the use case, and like it's already been mentioned, like the benefit versus the cost of it. And I actually think, because we're so early, that there are tons and tons of use cases where we could effectively apply it, and it will make a very positive difference.
Eddie, is it something that's come up with the councils in London?
It does. I mean, I think we can't work on the net zero agenda and sort of non-ironically be using AI at the same time. I mean, I think I'd agree with other panelists, though, that in part this is bigger than, say, city government sector. We're a key player in it, but when every industry is now looking at this, I think this is where, for those on the call today from subnational governments, we need national policy to look at this, and particularly from country infrastructure level. Where are we what's our energy generation provision? What's the water networks looking like? Are we having data centers at a hyperlocal level, or are we relying all of them to be in far-flung countries? These are big strategic decisions where we probably need national scale politics to get involved to plan them in the way that they need to be. But of course, city government have their role to play as well.
Excellent. So in answering that question, you've all mentioned about selecting, prioritising the right use cases. So I just wanted to pick that up a bit more broadly about how you're going about that. So there can be a tendency to think that AI is the answer to every problem, for example. So just trying to think about how you pick the right ones to attack. So I'll start with you, Eddie. You had that one around billboards and business rates, for example. Where did that come from?
So in part, we can take inspiration from learning, just like calls like this one, learning from other cities. So there was a particular supplier of the digital twin technology called Cyclomedia, who I know has worked in many other cities across Europe. It's one they're tried and tested elsewhere. Every jurisdiction has slightly different quirks, but they've managed to successfully test that principle in a London borough. So we believe that can be scaled. I think more broadly, we're really encouraging the idea of just micro experimentation. And I think rather than writing the grand AI strategy, trying to predict what those big use cases are, just as we've heard, like inviting colleagues to go, there's a pain point here where what we're learning in our personal lives or seeing in other industries about how AI could help. Maybe we can try a small level experiment, get a bit of user feedback, and actually sort of build that confidence muscle. One thing we are trying at Lottie, though, is, as I said, my fear is that, like a lot of mistakes we've made in the past on broader digital transformation, we treat it like an IT issue and not an organizational reform issue. And so we've been trying to encourage much more creativity on looking at some of our very complex service areas, like adult social care, so caring for older people out there in the community. I defy anyone to tell me that a piece of AI alone resolves the enormous pressures we've got there. So the social worker case note tool, fantastically useful for that instance. But when we take a step back and look at the whole area, we need to radically change the service model. We need to involve new people. We've got to get data flowing to different organizations for that joined up look. So one technique we've been trying is mocking up entire areas of service and hiring actors to literally act out the journey of a typical Londoner trying to navigate our very complex care system, and then inviting tech companies, every bit of the public sector, residents, universities, consultants to come and watch it, and then say, well, you tell us all the problems in this journey, and you tell us where solutions could help. It might be AI, it might be tech, it might be something much more sort of basic. We need that combination and all minds on the problem, so we use AI in the proportionate way, and that's been helping us.
Thanks. And Sonia, you mentioned some initial challenges that you have pinpointed. How did those come about, and how do you go about selecting them in general?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So it's a very similar approach to what Eddie spoke about. It's so yes, we have these bigger challenges around, how do you move millions of people across the city with all the congestion and construction, and it seems very, very huge. And I've shied away from, we've got to go build this huge digital twin model because, that can be all consuming. And, 5 years down the road, we're no further ahead. So instead, we really are reaching out to our own employees and our own staff to say, like, what are the very, even in your neighborhood or in very specific instances, let's walk through that experience. And again, let's make sure we understand the experience and where do we inject different kinds of tech, AI being one of them. And we have been able to uncover where AI will be useful because we're looking for more predictive modeling because we want to model if we did construction in a certain neighborhood with these other things going on, what would that mean to some of the flow? That is a pretty good use case, and we can do it kind of area by area and kind of build towards that larger model if it makes sense. So that's really been our approach. And as I mentioned, like we are launching a challenge, so we want this to be ground up because it is we work differently when we are powered by AI. So if you've got an AI assistant, you're working with AI tools. What do I need to do to be educated about it? How does my role change? And then how do your team roles change? So it's that human aspect is, I think, more important than the technology itself, because injecting this in isn't really going to make us much of a difference unless we start to work differently ourselves.
Marie, how have you gone about prioritizing use cases? I mean, obviously there's a cost to these tools, as we mentioned, financial as well as potentially environmental. So how have you gone about that?
I think actually I would say some of the similar things as Sophia and Eddie are saying. I think we have kind of a dual approach. On one way, we are very focused on having top leadership and management deciding what way to go, because the technology will give us a waste a broad ways of opportunities. So which are really our problems, and where do we believe that we can scale something and we want to change something? Because AI is just a technology, then as Eddie and Sonia says, there's a whole organization. And on the other hand, we also want to have a more AI-ready organization. So having like the ground for innovation, everybody being able to look what is best practice in regard to my area. And like we use a lot of the term like having the professional staff and leaders having a stronger imagination in regard to digitalization and AI.
Excellent, thank you. And Mark?
Yes, I think very much similar to others. I think I kind of split it into two tracks almost. I think there's that low friction, that learning from others, those quick wins, things like translation. Translation is an absolute no-brainer in an AI space because it increases accessibility to services for people. And it's loads faster and it's loads cheaper. So it's win-win-win all around. But then it's also having that kind of track running in the background that is the slower burn. It's the things that are the massive organizational change. Can we as an organization use something like AI to completely reimagine the way that we deliver children's social care or adult social services, for example? And that's not the thing that I'm going to deliver in 6 months. It's not going to be the thing you're going to deliver in 10 years, probably. It could be the 20, 30-year program of stuff that we're looking at. And that's about, there's quite a lot of, I've got a horse, I want a faster horse. And I think it was credited to Henry Ford, but it's that, do we need a horse or do we need a car? And starting to get some of that thinking going now, that actually how can we genuinely do that proper big transformation that is really going to give you that seismic shift for an organization. So I think we've got to try and drive both of those forwards at the same time, which makes it even more tricky.
Yeah, excellent. So I wanted to follow up on that and ask about how you design an effective pilot or project so that you can understand whether it's working and whether and how to scale it up. So Mark, maybe I thought it was interesting that you mentioned about the mental health impact of the tool. Was that something that you always planned to measure, or was that something that just came out?
I mean, interestingly, it wasn't. It was a side benefit. And it's a hugely significant side benefit that just sort of popped out there. But it's about, for me, the kind of that progress, the approach is about identifying your allies. If you can get people that are really engaged, you don't want to start on the back foot of trying to fight. And then it is, as others have said, it's kind of that starting small, having something that's really clearly defined that you can deliver. But then also we've got something that we need to reframe around language. So we have this concept of the phrase fail fast. But are we actually failing? If I give you a daft scenario, if you went into something like a maze and you go down a dead end and then you go back the other way, do you think, oh, God, I failed to get out that maze? You don't. You just learned from the fact that it was there and you moved on and you went down the next path. And that sort of reframing of that language and approach, I think that becomes really important, that we shouldn't see it as failure. It's just a slightly different route to get to the objective. But all of it is moving you closer to that objective, whether you learn from it or whether it actually delivers something.
Eddie, have you got any views on how you design those pilots and projects so you can measure the results and the scale, and also, do councils across London necessarily see the same sort of results? How transferable is it always across?
So I think that there's some real basics here, which often we're not brilliant at doing, which is like, have we baselined where we are now? Have we set out clearly where what we think the change will be, and are we monitoring and measuring that change? And again, we suffer in the public sector of endless press release style case studies without the rigorous evidence. So like we'd say on anything, let's make sure we're capturing that data. I think on the scalability point, one of our design principles at Lottie is that every pilot that we're involved with, we design with at least 3 different councils, so that you are not creating something that just weirdly uniquely fits in one organizational context. And I think ideally, if we're trying to scale solutions across the public sector, I really believe in that collaborative model. Let's do it together, so we're not just creating yet more and more kind of service silos. I think Mark's touched on this as well, but it's thinking about some of the unintended consequences. Or we implemented an AI expecting one particular outcome. There's lots of sort of other knock-on effects that we might not predict, and I think we've got to be open, curious, and aware of what those might be. And I think too often of organizational reform and talking about topics like AI, we make the economist mistake of thinking that human beings are these econs, these are perfectly rational human beings like robots who will react in a completely predictable way. People have an emotional reaction to public services as well, whether they feel heard, whether they feel respected. So when every government and council around the world at the moment seems to be saying they want this most incredible AI chatbot that will serve all queries, well, yes, maybe. But if you want to have deafening silence in a workshop, start by inviting everyone to share their life-affirming stories of engaging with the chatbot. I'm got very few examples. So, and actually the frustration of not being heard, not being able to talk to a human actually can cause far more damage for some people in certain situations. So we should be aware of the risk of the false efficiency of making human things transactional and use AI in its right place. So with that word of caution, I think it's being really observant about the impact and to navigate that maze successfully, as Mark put it.
Thanks. And Marie, what have you learned about successfully designing pilots and programs?
Well, I think I have 2 points. First of all, we are like really focused on bringing both legal, digital, and professional capacities together from start, because we need each other to understand what is the infrastructure now, what are the possibilities, what are the needs. And then also I would say that sometimes AI also changes the way of collaboration. I have an example from Denmark. I mentioned that we work with AI in regarding to fleet optimizing. We actually started working together across the municipalities in Denmark with an AI project. And now, after having seen the use of the AI, we're starting to look into collaborating about our infrastructure and how to have the system. So that is like actually the other way around. So I have to think we have to be open and agile in regard to how is this going to change our way of cooperation.
Thank you. And Sonia, as you start to look ahead to some projects, how are you thinking about designing them in this way?
So I like the approach on like there are just some basics. So I came into the city. I've been at the city about 2 years, and I do come from private sector. And everything is about the business case, and everything is about, do you have the right, do you know the as is and like where you're going and what's going to be the delta. So just bringing some of that discipline, I think is critical for any technology project. Is what problem are we really trying to solve? Does it line up to those 4 priorities that I spoke about? Because yes, we want people to get creative, but let's be honest, like if they help with the 4, they're going to get prioritized first, because that's where the resources are, that's where the capital is, that's where the attention is. So making sure that lines up. And then it's, the change adoption. So, I mean, we can't talk about it enough, but especially with AI, like the way we work or the way we interact should change. Otherwise, it's really not as effective. So what's the appetite for change? And very simply, because we have so many opportunities, if the appetite isn't there, we'll move on to the next idea, because there's just so many that we can pursue. So it does become a critical factor. And, whether we're going to pursue something is just the readiness for change. Do we have the right people on it? And are we willing to look at it very differently? But I do think it's very important to kind of measure that success, because yes, AI can be fun, AI can be quite interactive, but is it really going to be useful? And are we really going to put resources behind it? It has to be very effective for us to do so. And I think the idea of starting small with a pilot is really fantastic, because it is a learning journey that, everybody is on. Like, how do you really interact with it? What are actually the possibilities? So in some ways, it's unfair for us to ask, our user group to say, help define the business case all up front. Like, you do need to experiment to really discover it. So doing very small, safe experiments are a good way to really figure out, do all those elements kind of fall in place, or do they not? That's okay. We'll come back to it at a later date and move on to where we are ready and where we are ready to commit.
Excellent, thanks. So we've had a question from the audience, and it touches on something you all mentioned as part of the fundamentals. So data. And so the question is, how can cities deal with poor quality, incomplete and biased legacy data in training AI systems? And also wanting to broaden that out to, what do cities and local governments need to be doing to get their own data in good shape to make the most of these systems? Mark, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, so the legacy bit's a really interesting one. I got asked this question previously at a different event, and that was, we have this assumption that the more data you put into the model, the better it will get. But actually, there's a really interesting thing, and there are, big tech organizations that are running foundational models that are just trying to cram as much data as they possibly can do into these foundational models. The difference that I think we need to consider is that if I look at something like an interaction between an adult and a social worker, keeping that example, that if somebody recorded that as I had a difficult conversation, difficult at the point in time that that word was recorded, nobody was thinking, well, rules-based technology is going to get applied across the top of this, and how I describe this really, really matters. So actually, maybe that picks up a negative connotation. If you just said that the person was tired, stressed, upset, maybe that would give you a totally different score from an AI perspective. And actually, you would look at that in a totally different way. So I think we need to be really honest about, it's not just about cramming more data in the model to make the model better. There's a genuine consideration of how far back do we go, and is just putting more information in making it worse than, in theory, at making it better. So I think for me, that is probably one of the fundamental challenges. The other part is around ownership. I think lots of organizations struggle with data ownership. I think it is what it is. If I look at lots of local authorities, they probably don't have information asset ownership embedded within things like job descriptions. I think we have a disparity between data and money. We know that poor data quality costs us money, but yet you will have your budget manager. They will be trained. They will be supported by finance. You will do your regular forecasting. But we probably don't have the same level of rigor within lots of organizations around data. And actually that balance needs to be addressed, in my view.
Thank you. Marie, your thoughts on biased or incomplete data in AI models, and also any work that you're doing to improve your own data?
Yeah, I also think that is quite a challenge for us, and we have also really having a focus on our data governance, what data we have in our different infrastructure, and we're really, when we started producing this data like 20 years ago, we never thought that AI would come. So this is a big, huge challenge, and we are talking much more with our politician about having to put some investments in getting the right data. And also, like, in regarding to bias, I think we have some interesting discussions ahead with our politicians. How much data do we want to collect from the city? I mean, the technology is there. We can put sensors, cameras everywhere, but do we want to do that? And how can this, and are we actually ready? Do we have the structure to have a safe data to and have privacy in the public areas? So I think there's a lot of discussions ahead, and we have to make sure to have the right alignment with our politicians and go ahead with pilots and showing what can we do.
Sonia, as you embark on this, how are you thinking about the data?
So we are, we're not unlike every other city where we have tons and tons and tons of data in lots of different systems and very siloed. We have, over 50 different divisions at the city. And so everybody, and then they've got their own set of systems. So we've got lots of data, but it is very disparate and hard to connect. But at the same time, because we're focused on some use cases, the finding is also we have, in many cases, good enough data, right? So it's perfection isn't what we're looking for. It's what's good enough for the use case or the hypothesis that we're trying to prove out or the very specific experience. And we are establishing an enterprise data platform where we will start to pull this data into in a governance framework and start to share it across the city. Because that is one of the other gaps, is because it's siloed. We definitely have the data. It's finding where it is and what state it's in and how do you access it. So our approach is going to be, let's take the very broad use cases. We're establishing an enterprise data platform and set up a governance structure for how we will share that across the city to solve the very particular issues. I mean, in my past life, we had done kind of big data warehouse projects, and sure, they're great to get it in one place, but it didn't solve for the cleanliness. It didn't solve for how you bridge it together and how you actually use it. So I think this is a more pragmatic approach for how we can get at it.
Thank you. And Eddie, you mentioned data as one of the fundamentals.
Indeed, and I think context is king here, right? So there are some contexts where actually one thing AI, particularly Gen AI tools, are incredibly good at is handling ridiculously messy data. So in sort of this like white collar style work tasks, you can say, here's an old report I wrote, here's an Excel spreadsheet, which several people have contributed to inconsistently. Can you find the key trends and do a bit of sense making? It's great at that. Is it a high risk context? No, it's me passing on some key insights to a management audience in a non-sensitive subject. That is fundamentally different from, I'm going to make some really big decisions that could impact a young child's life based on some ancient notes that an AI has been trying to absorb from an old case management system. So I think we've got to be proportionate. We've got to be sensible about this. Interestingly, there's an opportunity in some cases for AI to be part of the solution in the future. So the example that Mark has mentioned on this Magic Notes tool in social care, said other providers are available. One of the things you notice when you look at the results of that all around the country is that the quality of the case note write-up is often slightly better, dare we say it, than some of the ones that were written purely by humans, in part because, as Mark said, they're spending 80% of their time doing admin. People get tired. People are in a rush. Sometimes some of those past case notes were not as robust. They might be better in future if they're being sort of fully transcribed by AI. Final thing I think to say is in all these contexts, we have this concept of human in the loop. We really need to dig deep into that in a public sector context to make sure people are not ignoring all of their professional expertise, blindly deferring to what an AI is telling them, making sure, and this is in most public sector legislation already, you as the public sector official are fully accountable for anything you do, no matter how you reach that conclusion, whether by AI or otherwise. And again, it comes back to, it's not just data, this is also about skills, knowing how people have got the confidence to say, we know the AI will not have taken this into consideration. That could be a red herring. When to override it with a professional judgment, recognize the context is different, recognize when the context is not sensitive and it's fine, and when it would be completely inappropriate. So there's a bit of a maturity curve here we've all got to learn through. And again, small experimentation in safe settings. We've got to build our confidence steadily to make sure we do this prudently.
So yeah, to pick up on that, you've all mentioned skills and capabilities. So I'm interested to understand, is it new types of roles, new types of skills we need to teach people, and also how to change some attitudes. So maybe I'll follow up with you, Eddie.
So one emerging role, building on what I've just said, that we might need in public sector organizations is more of a sort of an AI audit type one. It's not auditing the AI as such, but for example, I speak to some councils and national governments who say, great, now we've been struggling for years to afford an amazing team of 10 data scientists. Are you now telling me I could have 9 data analysts who can do the work of data scientists because they're augmented by AI tools? Potentially, in some contexts, that might be possible, but you still need someone in that team who can audit what's happened and said, okay, I see this looks intuitive. However, there's a misunderstanding here. At least one person who understands enough about the service context, the corporate function, the data model to be able to spot if something looks plausible but wrong. I think there's often this famous phrase with generative AI, it comes up with what an uninformed person thinks an intelligent person would say. And often if you're a deep expert in a particular area, if you're a lawyer and you get it to draft a contract, you can spot all the ways that it's kind of slightly misunderstood it. It looks great if you're not a lawyer. Think of all the different public service contexts in that front. We need to make sure someone in that expert human in the loop phase is present in those, particularly in any sort of context of any form of risk. Lots more we could say on skills, but that's one particular thing that we're certainly thinking about in London.
Marie, how are you going about building the right capability across the organisation to make the most of these tools?
At the moment, we're really focusing on making different upskilling programs, both for leaders and not only in regard to AI, but also actually to understand data and infrastructure, because normally professional leaders are only users and now they have to understand what context to use AI in. So we do that across the municipality in our own administration, and we also, as I mentioned, we have this our own Gen AI tool, and we also go down to the employees and talk with them about frustrations and about the possibilities. So we have a large focus on developing the organization, and then I think that it will take time to see how do we have to change the organization? Do we have to have someone coordinating a bit more the AI? I think we're going to have it, and it's going to be cross-sectional. But I think we think that we have to build the organization as we go ahead. It's really difficult to start just to make a great leap.
Sonia, has the work that you've done so far sort of highlighted any work that you want to do around skills?
We have. So we're starting again at a very rudimentary level around educating on what Gen AI is, and really, really kind of poke at that critical thinking. So, really challenge it, really understand it. Some of what was said around, your expertise and making sure you've got a critical lens on what's being generated. And then I think over time, it is educating on the data. So as much as we say we have lots of data, we collect lots of data, there isn't a good appreciation for what that data actually is, what it means, and how to put it together. So through this enterprise data platform, we will also complement it with a center of excellence to start some of that conversation, some of that education around how to put that data together, where to look for it, and again, how to critically think about it, right? Because it's at the end of the day, AI hopefully will take away some of the more manual tasks, some of the more time-consuming things that can actually be engineered. But we really still have an accountability for what is it that we're asking it to do, and making sure we're critically thinking about what the output is and how to really apply it, right? Because it's never going to be perfect. So how do we overemphasize those human attributes? And those skills is going to be really, really important for us to work effectively with it. But the data piece, yes, you've been collecting data for 20, 30, 40 years, but got to be honest, I don't think people know what it actually is, where to find it, and how to use it. So making sure that that acumen is in the organization is going to be critical.
Mark?
So I think we need to be honest that we're playing a bit of catch up. People are learning a lot more about AI outside of their work environment than they are inside the work environment, because that is changing. The exposure to it is much faster. So that is a real challenge. But so I say to people that I think my role is becoming less data lead and more behavioral scientist. It's about taking people on that journey. It's about building confidence, building trust in the solutions that actually this is good enough to help support you. And picking up on Eddie's comment about human in the loop, we've actually changed the language slightly. We talk about human in the lead rather than in the loop. It's a really subtle difference. We're only changing one word, but it feels like it reframes that quite significantly, that we're not just part of the mix. We're actually there, that's really driving that. And it's something that we can use, but it's not the only thing that we use. So trying to change some of that language, trying to change people's thoughts around that, deliver things like masterclasses and training within the tool sets, all of those usual sorts of things that others have mentioned. I think we're doing that too. But yeah, I think that's kind of where we're headed.
Okay. And this is a slight aside, but we're seeing a little bit of a trend of national governments and state, regional governments, maybe some local governments, appointing chief AI officers. Do you think that there is a need for that type of role, and how would you think about that, Marie?
As I mentioned before, here in Denmark, we actually have quite a large interest, and we have this national AI task force. And I think that serves a very good purpose, because there are really some legal issues, some barriers that you have to decide whether to change to have AI-ready legislation. And so I think that we really need the national interest. We don't have like a chief officer, but still our Minister of Digitalization has really put this on the spotlight and on the agenda, and that has made a great difference. Now we're just interested in seeing how can we use it and what will happen.
Thank you. Sonia, what do you think? Is there a need or a case for this type of role?
I think there's a case for having someone lead the initiative, because there is an education that's required, and someone to really help kind of support okay, here's how we're going to educate ourselves, here's some of the use cases, and get the organization going. But at the end of the day, I do believe it's going to be embedded in each of the functions. So as much as I'm leading it on behalf of the City of Toronto, like the messaging has been, the person running transportation needs to understand it better than I do, because it's their business, it's their data, it's their operations and their issues that we're trying to solve. So I see my role as bringing it forward, and providing the platform, the tools, the guidelines, kind of clearing the way for the usage of, because we do need an enterprise strategy. But I think everyone is going to become, very intimate with AI in their domains, and I do think that's where it rests. Not unlike, leading your people, not unlike leading your operations, not unlike interacting with who your customer is. It's very similar to that in my mind.
And Mark?
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll certainly help the recruitment, trying to get somebody if you put AI in the title nowadays. Do organizations specifically need somebody? I think we quite often have a lot of the skills within roles that exist within the organization around managing tech, that managing change and impact. I don't see, I mentioned behavioral science, I don't see a massive increase in people saying that actually we've got this technology that might fundamentally change a whole bunch of people's lives. And have we got some behavioral science people wrapped around this to ensure that we can actually embed this and really drive the value out of it? So I think it becomes an interesting one. I think somebody needs to be watching it. Does that need to be specifically a CAIO? I'm not sure at this point in time.
Eddie, any thoughts?
I think I'm inclined to agree with Mark there that there's a risk that we keep creating the czar for such and such, and if we do this every time, the czar for big data, the czar for blockchain, the czar for AI. Fundamentally, we need organizations to be mature, intelligent consumers and users of the latest tools available to them, which includes some technologies like AI. But as Mark just said, we've got behavioral science, we've got open innovation, we've got design thinking. To be honest, what I think most governments and public sector organizations need is not more technologists, it's an army of service designers who are incredibly good at working with residents as well as your staff to fundamentally rethink more imaginatively whole ways of working using the full 21st century toolkit. So yes, someone must be watching it and have the requisite skills to help inform those intelligent decisions. There's a risk, though, that if you go like, that's the innovation team or that's the digital team, that everyone else goes, oh, it's not our problem. They're worrying about it. And actually, this is so ubiquitous. We need to upskill the whole organization, including leadership down to frontline workers, because everyone is using it. As I said, with AI, this is different from the blockchain type conversation. It's much more widespread. We can't just have that as one person on the hook for everything. So more widespread, I think, would be the preferred option.
Great. So we have a question in from the audience, which we have touched on, but they've asked, how do you create citizen-centric AI tools that don't fall into the vanity tech trap? Noting the comments that you've all made around human interaction. So just be interested in what you've learned about both messaging these tools to citizens, but also including them in the design or even the ideas for where AI could be used. So Mark, when you were designing your social care tools, did you involve, I'm guessing, staff, but any citizens?
So because it's a prototype, it's something that's done against synthetic data just to prove the point. But you will notice that lots of local authorities have citizen charters, and that's around that engagement with the citizens. I think that how do you stop falling into the vanity tech trap is that you start with the person. If people just assume it's a technology solution, if it's the magic shiny bullet that's going to fix everything that we know it isn't, and it never will. If you start at the person and you work back from there, and AI may be part of the solution to help that individual, but as Eddie pointed out earlier, it's unlikely to ever be the whole solution to support that individual. So it's about how we make sure that we merge tech as a tool within the toolboxes, so to speak, rather than just thinking of it as the toolbox.
Eddie, how about in London? What's been done around, what have you learned about messaging to residents, but also co-creation with residents?
So I think that co-creation bit is key. This is where the core things we already know about designing good services is start with the users. The users are both your residents and your staff. We don't want it being amazing and shiny for the resident and awful on the back end. And I think just those good practices of proper user research, proper user engagement, the behavioral science element, I think is absolutely key, because again, we're not these rational automatons interacting with digital services. People will feel and have an emotional reaction, connection, or rejection of some of these. So getting that early feedback, I think, is really, really important. And again, one of the big leadership behaviors we've got to switch to that make this possible is we can't have leadership teams saying to digital and service teams, we need to know the whole solution you're going to make in advance. We need your line item budget before the start of the financial year. And this is the common modus operandi in public sector around the world, and say they want to innovate and do this responsible micro experimentation. We need that build, test, learn loop. Let's try a thing, get it in front of a real user, whether with synthetic data or real data, depending on the risk context. Let's get some feedback. Let's actually observe, not just assume we know the answer. So I think the answer is co-creation done well with service design.
And do you find that you get surprising feedback from staff and residents that you might not have thought about in doing it without them?
Yes, and I think from the staff one, so from the pilots that I've seen of tools like that, transcription note with social workers, it tends to fall along the bell curve. 30% absolutely love it and think this is transformative and use words like, I've rediscovered my vocation because I'm now doing the thing I came into the sector to do. Another third are actually, yeah, this is kind of useful and fine, I'm on board. Another third fall into that bit, and this is going to be a major challenge across all sectors, is this going to take my job? Is this de-skilling me? Is this, this feels quite threatening. And we have to be sensitive, I think, to that. My general take is that this could be insanely disruptive to a lot of sectors, particularly in the private sector, potentially the charity sector. In the public sector, I'm certainly speaking for the UK, we have more service demand than we can possibly cope with our current workforce. I don't see a scenario where we cut back even yet further on headcount. They might just be different roles. So if I was in translation right now, or was I an office PA writing up lots of meeting minutes, yes, I think my job is not going to look the same a year, 2 years from now. For social workers, this is just going to help them get through more of that backlog, but we've got to do it with them, not just impose it upon them. So I think it's, yeah, treating people like human beings, doing it in that organizational, positive cultural piece, not just as an IT project. We've got to learn the mistakes of the last 20 years of digital transformation failures.
Thank you. And Sonia, have you got plans around this? I know you're doing the hackathon, and also have the guidelines that you've developed sort of prompted any questions from residents or staff about what this means for them?
Yeah, and the City of Toronto has over the last few years built an open data platform, which is open to the public and provides a lot of our data sets around services, decisions, reports, etc. So we've had quite a bit of public engagement just based on the data sets that we publish. Earlier this year, we did have a open to the public open data awards, where we invited the public to demonstrate some of the solutions or insights they've been able to come up with, leveraging our platform, but also pulling in other data that we may not have access to. And it was surprisingly really positive in terms of the solutions they came up with to the problems that maybe we don't even think about. For example, we had one open water swimmer who wanted to pull together data from different data sets around the quality of water around Lake Ontario, which is our big lake where our city sits, and be able to provide that level of intelligence to others who may be interested. So they're very small use cases, but they're the ones that matter to our community members. And we came out with 3 or 4 of these examples. So what we are doing is to build on that, as we are opening to the public a Mayor's Challenge, a Mayor's AI Awards, in the second half of next year, which will build on that open data, but also invite those to pull in some AI use cases using our data, using their data to help solve, again, against those 4 umbrella problems, is help solve some of that. So I expect it's going to be fantastic, because we do have a really well-engaged public. And just naturally in our our practices, whether it's AI or technology or any other programming, we do have a very robust public consultation process. So we actively engage the public regularly on what matters. How do we make sure the services that we're building new or revising really are fit for purpose, and they will matter to our residents.
Thank you. And we're almost out of time, but Marie, I'm going to come to you for your closing thoughts on any examples of how you've brought citizens and staff in to better design a service.
Yeah, I would just say that we actually have a long tradition of co-creating with citizens, long before AI and technology, and we really have to use that strength now in another debate. And also with our professionals, we're used to asking, how do they want Copenhagen to be in the future? So we really have to build on that experience. And also in regarding to just climate change, we have a large engagement of our citizens, of our politicians, and really working with what city do you want to make. And I think for the citizens, it's not essential what technology, it's essential what do we want to use and what is our goal.
Thank you. Well, we're almost out of time there, so I just want to thank the panelists for taking the time today, sharing such great examples, and to the audience for coming along and sharing your questions. So thank you very much.